being yourself on YouTube sounds simple, right? But when you try and do it, something just feels off. I've had the same problem too. And in this video, I want to talk to you about what I did to fix it. So one of the first things you've got to ask yourself is, who are you? Now that sounds very, very dreamy and very esoteric, but you need to ask yourself, who are you in normal life? Because I would say that you are different people depending on the circumstances. If you go for a job interview, are you the same person in that job interview as you would be if you went to a bar or a coffee shop or something with a close group of friends? Probably not. So you need to understand the sort of core idea of who you are. Now, in my career, I've played a lot of different characters as a police officer and as a manager in the private sector. I have had to deal with a lot of different people. And if I went to, for example, a rough neighborhood where there were often problems and I had to speak to somebody who lived in that neighborhood, then I would probably adapt my way of speaking, my intonation, even my accent, and with a consideration for what that person had been through, using empathy and trying to understand their actual situation and how it was to be them in their situation. So I wouldn't have been the same person then as I might have been when I went to, say, some high class event where everybody's walking around in suits with loads of money. I probably would have acted in a slightly different way. The reason you do that is because you want to fit in and to build some kind of trust and understanding with the people that you're dealing with. And I think most people do that in everyday life. Now, there are some people who only remain the same all the time. And I would argue that that's not a good thing. Because, for example, I had someone who came for a job interview once to a prestigious government department for a security interview. And he came along in a tracksuit and a hoodie. And within 30 seconds, he was swearing and talking about his previous boss in a negative way. And of course, he didn't get the job. Now, if he'd adapted himself a little bit to understand where he was and the audience he was talking to and what his end goal was, he might have got somewhere. But if you're that sort of person who can't adapt in any way, I don't think that's a good quality. But do you have to change yourself completely for YouTube? No, you don't. But what happens to people often, and I was watching a similar video to this one actually by Rob the Maritimer the other day, and he was talking about the fact that when he first started, he was trying to play a character, if you like. He was trying to copy somebody else. And I actually went back and watched those videos he was talking about, and I saw exactly what he meant. Because he was there over-exaggerating facial expressions, intonation, the words he used, everything. It just wasn't Rob. And the Rob the Maritimer you see now versus that one is completely different. And I guess, without knowing him personally, but I would say the Rob that you see now is as close as you're going to get to the real Rob. At least it's a baseline Rob, whereas that, he was playing a character. Now, people tend to do that on YouTube. They play some kind of character. You have some perception in your mind of what you think people want to see. You're going to play a certain character, perhaps. Maybe it's the reporter style, where you over-exaggerate everything and your facial expressions and the way you speak and everything, like you're explaining something to a baby. Maybe you're playing some kind of performer, or you're trying to copy somebody else. And all of those things probably won't work out well for you in the end. Because if you're performing something, you're not just sitting and having a chat. Now, educational content, sure, you might tailor yourself a little bit to presenting a certain thing rather than worrying about who you are as a person. But I think if you do any videos where it's important that people see you, which I think quite a lot of videos are, because people want to see that, then you're going to have to stop playing these characters. So how do you do that? The first thing you have to do is sit down and, I would say, write down who your actual audience is. Who are you trying to speak to? Now on my channel, I'm trying to speak to people preferably over 40, who are trying to start a YouTube channel or grow a YouTube channel. But that's quite broad. So I need to sit down and think, who is my actual audience? Now, when I worked in security, if I was in a management meeting with a bunch of other multi-million pound organisations and their managers were there, and we were having some sort of conference or something, I would probably adapt the way I spoke versus if I was in a group of bouncers, basically, which is where I started. Because I would talk very differently in both of those different scenarios and present things differently. So who are you presenting your stuff to? That's the first thing you need to nail down. You need to write it down. You need to have a clear picture of who that would be. And you need to write down what they would like, what they wouldn't like, what they want to see and what they don't want to see. Now for me then, if we go back to the 40 plus idea, then obviously everybody's welcome on my channel. But if I'm going to target people 40 plus, they might want a sort of more relaxed feel about the channel and to receive information in a slightly slower, more methodical way, especially when I explain something like CapCut, for example. Because having to pause and every second and try and work out what the person's talking about on the screen, oh, I've missed that, it's not fun for anybody, I don't think. So my content is suited to slow down a little bit, take it a little slower. It's not aimed at a 20-year-old who wants jump cuts and effects and a billion transitions on the screen and stuff. I don't think my viewers need that. Now, is it a bad thing if I do some of that? No, probably not. But I don't need to. So I think you need to understand who it is you're talking to, what they want to see, who they are. And when you understand that, then you want to write down who you're not trying to talk to. Because there's no point in trying to please people that you're not trying to speak to, because it won't get you anywhere and you'll just end up being fake. And those people will probably realise that and won't like it anyway. So target those core people, because you don't need everybody, you just need your people. I always go back to it, there's 2.6 billion monthly active users on YouTube, and you only need a tiny percentage of those people to like you. So you don't need all the others, so don't worry about them. So when you talk about things like, oh, I waffle too much or I talk too slowly, for some people, yes, you do. That's exactly correct. But if that's the case and you're explaining things too much or you're going back over certain subjects over and over, could you improve that? Absolutely you could. And would that then put off the people you are trying to target? Probably not. If, for example, you say and all the time on your videos, if you notice it and you don't like it and you think you do that more in your videos than you're doing it in real life, then absolutely that might be something you want to fix. But if you do say and you tend to stumble over your words and stuff in real life, it doesn't really matter. Just do it. just do that on your videos then, because there's people who like you for that and people who don't care whether you do that or not. So do you need to fix it? Not really. Could you improve it? Sure. Would it make a positive difference to your videos? Probably, but you might not need to. So talking fast and slow is another one, exactly the same thing. Do you need to speak 100 miles an hour? No. Do you speak too slowly? Yes. Okay. Some people won't mind, but the ones that do will still appreciate, or the ones that don't mind, sorry, will still appreciate the fact that you try to improve a little bit for them. I'm sure they will. So take your core person of who you are, but make small changes that are positive changes. You don't need to change everything, and you don't need to be who you're not. So you need to find a middle ground and work out what your audience appreciates and what the people who you're not targeting also like and don't like, because you don't need to worry about that. You need to do the opposite of that. So you need to find the middle ground. You need to find the core part of you that exists, and those little adaptations you make depending on the circumstances you're in Then you can apply that to your YouTube audience and say, okay, if I'm targeting these people, this is the things that they'll appreciate. So I'm going to do those things. I'm going to add that into my character, but that's not taken away from the core of who I actually am. So once you get an idea of who your audience actually is, it becomes a lot easier. And the reason for that is that initially you don't really know who's watching. And when you're talking to a camera, it's unnatural. And I believe it's not the camera that's unnatural. It's the fact that A, you're talking to yourself, which is not normal for most people. It's certainly not to the extent that you're talking to yourself in a YouTube video. And the second part of that is that you're not sure who you're actually talking to, because if you're seeing someone in front of you, you're assessing them based on their actions, perhaps their appearance, all kinds of other things. Whether we like it or not, we do those things. And so we're trying to work out, who am I speaking to and how am I going to do that then to build some relationship between myself and them. But you don't know who you're speaking to on YouTube, so you need to have a good clear view of that in your mind, so that when you're speaking to the camera or you're talking to yourself, you have a visualization of who you're actually talking to. So it's not the camera that's the problem, it's your perception of who you're talking to. Now, one thing that can help some people, and I've heard people say teleprompters, for example, aren't good, or scripts aren't good. I disagree. If you have the skills to use them properly. What do I mean? If you're not confident or you're not sure what you're going to say, and you feel like you stumble over your words and you fill it with ums and ahs and all the other stuff that maybe you don't like when you present on camera, something you could do is script out your videos and use, for example, a teleprompter. I've got a link to my one down in the description if you want to check that out, because I do use one sometimes. But I've developed the skill, I think, to use it in a natural way. And the first part of that is when you're writing your script, if you're going to script out your video because you don't want to miss things out and you want it to be concise and confident and you don't want to over repeat yourself and all the other things that come with just talking off the cuff like I am now, to use a teleprompter properly and script it out, the first thing you want to do with your script is write it how you speak. So you need to read it out loud and you need to go through it and say, when you've written down, I want to do this, if you don't say I want to normally, and you say I want to do this, fix it. Because if you put language in there that you don't normally use, then you're going to be unnatural. The second part, as I said, is read through it out loud. And you need to walk around and practice, not just your script, but you need to, for example, sit in your car on the way to work, and you need to, where you'll see some people in traffic singing along to the radio, you need to be talking to yourself or to your prospective viewer about whatever subject it is. It doesn't even matter, right? You can talk about cooking, you can talk about fencing, fishing, rock climbing, it doesn't matter. Just talk about something in your car. Pick a subject, a random subject, and talk as much as you can about that subject, as if you're talking to somebody else about it. It sounds stupid, but it will help. I know it's helped me massively, because I'm used to talking to people about stuff. I'm not normally talking to myself or a perceived person in my mind. So it's a skill you need to get over and you need to develop. So script how you talk, read aloud, and practice. If you do those three things, you'll be able to confidently deliver not only an off-the-cuff talk like this, but you'll be able to confidently read a script and be clear and concise, and you'll sound a lot better by doing those three things. Now you could say, Adi, making all these improvements and changes to myself is going to take away from who I actually am, and I'm not going to be authentic then. And I would say this: making small improvements or small adjustments to yourself doesn't take away from who you actually are. In fact, it might improve things, certainly in relation to your YouTube videos, because it's about self-reflection and self-development and developing your character and who you are. And yes, you've got to talk more broadly on YouTube to a broader audience, which is why I don't, for example, swear in my videos. I might have done the odd occasion, but not very often. And I do sometimes in real life, of course, like many people do. But it doesn't add anything to the conversation. The people who swear a lot and watch my videos, won't notice that I'm not swearing or won't care because it doesn't detract anything. But the people who don't like swearing will appreciate the fact that I don't do it in my videos. And so, in fact, will advertisers in the future. So there's positives to developing a certain or modifying a certain part of your character. As long as you're not taking away the core you, then it can be a plus. So small improvements don't mean you're not being authentic. They just mean that you consider your audience and you value your audience and that you care about delivering good content to them. And that is, I think, one of the key things to grow your channel. So be yourself, modify small things, write down who your audience are, write down who your audience aren't, and understand what they will want, what they will like, what you think they'll appreciate. And in time, they'll tell you through their engagement, through their comments, through their subscriptions and so on. And then you'll start to gain more confidence. And then you'll start to be less like the reporter, less like the copier, and more like yourself. I hope that's helped. Hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Thanks for watching.